kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shog. Okay. So again, just remind everyone to turn off your microphones if you haven't already. Probably it's good once we do the recording, if I'm able to make that work. But it's recording already. Okay, wonderful. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, I'm glad that it's recording. So let's go ahead and do a short meditation before we begin. As usual, just do a few minutes of focusing on the breath. And then once we've done a few minutes of that, we will oh, good. I've gotten set up as the host. Okay, good. Once we've done a few minutes of meditating on the breath, then we'll set our motivation together. So just find a good meditation posture. And again, I know most of you are already familiar with doing meditation on the breath. So just do that quietly for the next few minutes, trying to keep your awareness with the breath as best as you can. Whenever the mind wanders, to have that vigilance, that introspection that's checking. And when we see that we've wandered, then we correct our meditation by letting go of whatever it was that distracted us and returning to the breath. So I'll ring the little bowl that I have here to begin the meditation period. And then I'll come in a few minutes and lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So now let's do a short reflection to set our motivation for tonight. And we're in this section of chapter 5 where we're looking at the second of the three types of ethics, perfection of ethics. And the second category has to do with gathering virtuous dharma, engaging in the actions that will help us to accumulate the merit that will be one of the main causes for becoming a Buddha. And so it is important then that we engage in the most virtuous mind for this exploration of this topic as well as the remainder of this chapter. Because everything that we do with the mind of bodhicitta, as long as it's dedicated becomes a cause for a sort of unceasing generation of goodwill towards all beings. When we dedicate it, we seal it and make sure that it will bring about the results. And when we have the motivation to begin with a bodhicitta, then we sort of earmark all of the merit that we're creating for that particular result, the result of our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. So this is how we make our lives very virtuous, is by doing all of our actions with bodhicitta. Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls this bodhicitta mindfulness, the opportunity we have to transform every single moment of this life into something that is very rich and powerful. So before we engage in our study tonight, continuing study of this chapter, set that motivation that is intent upon developing yourself completely, particularly tonight by looking at this perfection of ethics and Master Shantideva's teachings on this, so that you can develop the qualities that you will need to best serve all sentient beings. In the state of Buddhahood, you will then have, perfect compassion, perfect wisdom, and even the perfect power to benefit others, exactly in accord with their karma. So we engage in tonight's teaching with that mind of bodhicitta so that we can create that result, our own enlightenment, and subsequently the enlightenment of all beings. Okay, so again, welcome tonight to the continuing classes. We only got actually one more Monday, unfortunately, for this course, and then we'll be setting up for the 6th chapter, the perfection of patience. So be patient on that. That information will be getting to you soon if it hasn't already. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we are in terms of, I already talked about a little bit with regard to where we're at in this chapter. So set up the slides for tonight. And we once more go back to the main outline of all of this, the first outline of explaining the text of the chapter. We had kind of 2 outlines to that, and the first of them, explaining extensively how to practice, had 4 outlines. Again, you don't have to keep track of all these numbers. I'm keeping track of them for you. The third of those 4 outlines was this bigger section of the entire chapter, chapter 5, the practice of guarding the mind with mindfulness and introspection. Again, keeping in mind that introspection or guarding alertness is the main topic of this chapter 5. And of course, this mindfulness and introspection is applied with regard to the 3 outlines of this particular section, which are the 3 trainings in the morality, in the perfection of ethics, as it's called. Again, our ethical behavior, our morality, can be practiced by anyone, but we practice it here specifically with bodhicitta motivation. So it becomes a cause for enlightenment. So we already covered the first one. We finished that the previous time, training in the morality of restraint. Then last week, we started the way of training in the morality of accumulating virtuous dharmas, collecting dharma, accumulating that positive energy that we need on the path. And then we will get into tonight the third of these, training in the morality that accomplishes the welfare of sentient beings, which is a kind of a unique way that the bodhisattvas want to be able to benefit anyone who requires help and assistance, and to kind of bring some particular qualities to that work. We're going to see that tonight. But in terms of this, way of training or training in the morality of accumulating virtuous dharmas, the second, it had 2 outlines. The first outline we covered last week. It had to do with getting rid of our attachment to the body, recognizing that our attachment to the body can become a major obstacle in our wholehearted engagement in the practice of morality. So the second outline we began at the tail end of last week, and I'm going to just review quickly what we did in that one. It has to do with to be skillful in practicing virtue. So once we've gotten rid of our attachment or lessened our attachment to the body, how are we most skillful in practicing virtue, this second type of the perfection of ethics, training in morality? It has 3 outlines. The first one we went through last week. I'm not going to cover that one in its entirety because it was called Making Ordinary Actions Beautiful. And we looked at the kind of the basics of that, how to, meet people, how to handle their possessions, how to kind of do everything in a very quiet manner, not interrupting the peace of others. The second outline within it, we started again last week, skillfully interacting with others in a virtuous way. And so this has 5 outlines, and we'll go through the first few rather quickly. The first is how to act in relation to well-meant advice. So when somebody gives us advice, how do we act in regard to that? Master Shantideva says, again, just going to go through these rather quickly. With respect, I should gratefully accept unsought for words that are a benefit and that wisely advise and admonish me. At all times, I should be the pupil of everyone. Of course, this is the advice that all the Bodhisattvas are encouraged to follow, is to see everyone as our teacher, to really try to learn from any situation. As Pema Chodron said, to recognize that sometimes people help us to see our own blind spots. So if once someone gives you advice, gives you words to help you improve who you are and your qualities, even if it's not in line with reality, we can be grateful that they're seeing something, that they are trying to help others and so on, and try to learn what we can from that. The second outline, how to act in relation to speaking the truth. When someone says something good, I should say virtuously said. To all those who speak well, I should commend other people on their speaking the truth, on their speaking in line with virtuous attitudes. Then the third outline, how to act in relation to creating merit. This is where we ended last week, I believe. It says, and if I see, oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is, I think, where we ended. No, maybe not. I think we got one more verse. And if I see someone creating merit, I should praise him and be well pleased. Again, if we see others engaging in virtue, not just speaking truth and what have you, but actually engaging in virtuous activity, praise others, be pleased that they're doing this with their life. You may not like the person, but you can rejoice in the fact that they are doing this. Then the fourth outline, how to act when the qualities of others are praised. Yes, we did look at this last week. I should discreetly talk about the good qualities and repeat those recounted. If my own good qualities are spoken about, I should just know and be aware that I have them. Remember this whole idea of, trying to talk about the qualities of others, to really applaud them in regard to that. And if we're spoken about, not to toot our own horn or anything, but rather just to be aware that other people are recognizing those in us, and we can rejoice in that to some degree, and just be aware that we have them. We don't need to get a puffed up mind all about it, get prideful and what have you. And at the end of last week, I shared this short little verse from Lama Atisha's Bodhisattva's Jewel Garland, a very early text in the Lojong corpus of works. This says, reveal your own shortcomings, but do not seek out others' errors. Conceal your own good qualities, but proclaim those of others. This is a nice way to live our lives, is to be free to reveal the faults that we have. Not that we go around, burdening everybody with hearing all of our problems and our faults and what have you, but if someone is pointing them out, we easily accept that. We go, yes, I realize I'm not that good at doing that. That I made a mistake, whatever the case might be. But don't go pointing out other people's errors, at least, not with any good intention. There are times when it might be helpful for people to hear the errors that they're making, the faults that they've engaged in, but we have to be very skillful in doing that. But in general, don't be revealing everyone else's faults. That's not the purpose of our practicing Dharma. And then conceal our own good qualities, but proclaim those of others. So we do the opposite with regard to qualities. We don't reveal our own so easily. If others ask us and want to know about what we've done or what have you, that's fine. Don't do it with a prideful mind, just, it's information. And then proclaim those of others. Always be, as it was said in that previous verse from Master Shantideva, recount the good qualities of others, talk about them, make sure people know, that they're being applauded for the virtue that they're engaging in. So that takes us up to the fifth outline, which is where we left off last week. We're looking at now the benefit of making others happy. This is all, again, in this kind of way that we're acting virtuous with others and trying to do our best to be dedicated to helping others to be happy, which of course is the Bodhisattva path. The Bodhisattva path is about dispelling the suffering of others, trying to bring them happiness in the best way as possible. So verse 77 says, all initiatives are a source of joy. That would be rare, even if it could be bought with money. Therefore, the excellent qualities causing others joy causes the enjoyment of the happiness of joy. There's a lot of joy in that stanza. Let me read verse 78, which goes with this, and then we'll go into the explanation that's given in our commentary by Gyaltsab Je. I shall suffer no losses in this life, and in future lives shall find great happiness. But misdeeds will make me unhappy and bring suffering, and in future lives I shall find great suffering. So the idea here is that we've got two different alternatives being given here. In 77, this idea of being dedicated to the joy of others and doing what we can to help others to, have the enjoyment of the fruits of our actions, their actions, and so on. But if we do that, then we won't experience any losses. We will be free of the suffering, and if we if we do it, that we'll be free from the suffering. If we don't do it, we will have to experience suffering. And in future lives, we'll even find great suffering. So let's take this off screen. I'm going to share an alternative translation of this shortly that was kind of interesting from the Padmakara translation group that Pema Chodron uses. But in our text on page 37 of Gyaltsab Je's commentary, again, that most of you should have, it says, all the actions of the three doors of bodhisattvas, again, that's the body, speech, and mind, are to make others happy. Hence, this happiness of others is so precious that it is priceless, like a rare object that cannot be bought even with great wealth. So that was a sentiment in our version of verse 77, that you can't even buy that type of happiness, that is the happiness that arises from being dedicated to the welfare of others. And the actions we engage in, because we're doing them with bodhicitta, are going to bring about unbelievable happiness. In this world, whatever happiness you can buy with whatever wealth you have is very transitory, very temporary. It's not going to ultimately satisfy. But if you engage in actions to benefit others and are engaging in virtuous deeds and so on, you're doing that with bodhicitta motivation. Because again, this is all in the context of the six perfections that are the practices of a bodhisattva that are done with bodhicitta. So all of the happiness that ensues from that is beyond the transitory, mundane happiness that most sentient beings only know. Therefore, he says, with the quality of making others happy, others will not be jealous of one in this life. Others will be delighting in your own engagement in the virtue that is dedicated to the benefit of all. By practicing the happiness of joy in this life and making others happy, one will, without doubt, also receive possessions and so forth, and in the life beyond, one will also attain great happiness. This is kind of this idea that everything is sort of taken care of within the umbrella of bodhicitta. When Rinpoche talks about this Lama Zopa, he frequently says that with bodhicitta motivation, that's kind of the biggest motivation you can bring to anything. Well, included within that is the happiness of your own liberation, is the happiness of your own future rebirths, is the happiness of this life. Everything, all the happiness that we desire will be a part of that. If we live our lives with bodhicitta, it's not a guarantee that we're not going to experience some suffering, but we have this underwriting current that is creating this energy that we will be able to rely upon for the greatest possible happiness, this life, future lives, liberation, enlightenment, and even help others to attain that same state. And he concludes, he says, otherwise, as the shortcomings of being angry at the qualities of others, one will experience in this life mental unhappiness and physical suffering, and also in the next life, one will experience great suffering. So it's kind of interesting. In this last little part of our commentary, it almost starts talking about the idea of others being angry or jealous of the qualities of others and not rejoicing in them, which is kind of akin to what Pema Chodron's translation says around verse 77. The way that 77 again reads here with Gyaltsab Je's, it's all about our own engagement in virtuous actions towards others, bringing joy to others, and that becoming a source of joy for ourselves and others. Let me go to that translation because I thought it was kind of interesting, and it's a wonderful verse translated this way. Not that it isn't wonderful with the other way, but it is kind of interesting that we have a different flavor to this one. Again, this is the Way of the Bodhisattva, the Padmakara translation group's translation. There it says, the goal of every act is happiness itself. All the things that we do, we're trying to gain happiness, to have the happiness of being free from the suffering we're experiencing, if that's what our act is about. But it's all kind of centered around happiness. Though, even with great wealth, it's rarely found. So take your pleasure in the excellence of others. Let them be a heartfelt joy to you. So again, it's different flavor. Pema Chodron says that Zigar Control, one of her teachers, calls this rejoicement therapy. We all know the practice of rejoicing. And the sentiment behind this verse is a bit of, since it's so hard to find happiness and joy in this life, or even with great wealth, it's fleeting and temporary. But if we always take joy in the excellence of others, their qualities, their behavior that is virtuous, and so on, then they're a heartfelt joy to us. We always have a source of joy within us. I like this kind of sentiment behind this verse. I'm not sure why there's such different readings of it, because it is very different from the one I read in our translation. I don't know if there's different versions that different sects of Tibetan Buddhism use, this being the Nyingma source of it versus the Gelugpa. But I don't know. Again, it might just be again some subtleties in the translation that allow it to be read two different ways. But this is another way to look at this, and that kind of makes some sense with regard to 78, which in their version says, "By acting thus, in this life you'll lose nothing. In future lives, great bliss will come to you. Wrongdoing brings not joy but pain, and in the future, dreadful torment." So by acting in this way, rejoicing in others and their good deeds, we lose nothing. It's like totally free to do this. It's an investment in your own merit and your own virtuous activity to take delight in the virtuous activity of others, their excellences. And in future life, great bliss will come to you. It's a very positive energy we're creating by rejoicing in others' good deeds and qualities and so on. And of course, wrongdoing, which in the final version that Pema Chodron had in her commentary, she actually called it the sin of envy, to have that envious or jealous mind that is looking at others with kind of wishing that you had their good effects or their good qualities or whatever. That brings not joy, but pain, and in the future, dreadful torment. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know Tibetan enough to go back to the Tibetan and make sure, what the right translation is. They're just two different flavors to this verse. Um, and the benefit of making others happy, well, that's the name of the outline according to what we're, studying here. Both of them can be seen as ways to make others happy. By being dedicated to their happiness with bodhicitta motivation and so on, we create the causes eventually for their happiness. But we also make others happy by rejoicing in their good qualities, kind of being a source of that for them, helping them to engage in virtue, cheering them on in a sense. So now we come to the third outline within this section. Again, this section is again to be skillful in practicing virtue, the second within this second type of training in ethics or a perfection of morality. So it's called being skillful in the actions of the three doors, again, the body, speech, and mind, and it has three outlines. The first is how to act while you're speaking. Whoops. When talking, I should speak from my heart and on what is related, making the meaning clear and the speech pleasing. I should abandon attachment or hatred and speak in gentle tones appropriately. So again, this is sometimes Master Shantideva starts sounding a bit like a course in good etiquette, but nonetheless, if we are going to use our speech, and again, our speech is probably the most common way that we are connecting with others. It is the way that we are able to convey some meaning to them with regard to teaching the Dharma, as well as to console others, as well as to connect with them in other ways. Our speech is really important. And so it's useful to think of it as a tool that we need to make sure is pleasing in tone, is conveying the meaning correctly, is doing everything that we can to keep our speech as skillful as possible. So in Gyaltsab Je's commentary, page 38, he says, as it is explained in the Sutra on the 10 Grounds, when speaking with others, it should be agreeable from the heart, coherent, easily understandable, clear and pleasant, in order to agree with their mind. Having abandoned the motivations of attachment and anger, one should speak gently and appropriately in regard to time and amount. To when we speak as well as the amount that we speak, to not just keep rabbiting on about something when it's not necessary, but also to make sure that when we are talking to others that they're receptive to that speech. Again, not every one of us feels maybe as skilled in giving Dharma in particular to others, trying to help them engage in more positive attitudes and what have you. But just work with whatever you can to try to maintain some encouragement for people to move in more positive directions. And certainly if others are speaking unpleasantly and doing things that are, not so good to hear because their speech is very hateful or what have you, to do what we can to not egg that on, or to, go, yeah, you're right to feel that way, whatever. I mean, those sorts of behaviors are not so good. That wouldn't be a correct use of our speech at all. So how we want to be skillful in regard to our speech is to do it as pleasantly as we can, without any delusions present, if possible. Don't have any attachment or anger. And then in that way, we'll make sure that our speech becomes fruitful for others, becomes useful. It's not to say, again, that there won't be times when we might need to be a little more wrathful, but in general, we should be much more skillful and gentle in how we act, okay? The second outline, how to act while one looks, while one is kind of with others and kind of looking at others and so on. And there's wonderful advice here that is very similar to what Lama Zopa Rinpoche says frequently. He says, when beholding someone with my eyes, when looking at someone, thinking, I shall attain Buddhahood by depending upon this being, I should look at him candidly with love. So those beings that we meet, whether they be men and women, whether they be, animals, whether they be whoever, I mean, whatever animal, whatever being that we meet, we want to have that looking upon them with that eye of seeing them as somebody very precious and very dear, because our Buddhahood depends upon them. Lama Zopa often says, that we should hold the thought whenever we're meeting another being, that our happiness depends on that being. And if we think about it, all the happiness we gain, whether it be the happiness of a good rebirth or even the happiness we have of this life, look at all the resources that you have from this life. Well, they came from your prior practice of generosity. You needed others to do that. You had to give things, to give material goods, protection, dharma to others in order to be experiencing those in your life right now. So you needed others to accumulate that virtue for the happiness of this life. For the happiness of your next life, you have to engage in good morality, at least, plus all the other things that fill in your next life, generosity and so on. So you need others to practice morality. You need other beings to refrain from killing, refrain from stealing from them, refrain from lying to them. And then to engage in liberation, to accumulate even some merit to be able to achieve that result does take others. And then certainly to achieve Buddhahood, you need a collection of merit that is vast. They say it's the sum total of what would be accumulated over 3 great countless eons, an amazing amount of merit. Well, you need to engage in virtuous deeds towards others in order to achieve that. So we need others for all of our happiness. This is why Rinpoche says this is how we should look upon beings, is that they are the source of our happiness, past, present, and future happiness. So Gyaltsab Je says, page 38, when we look at sentient beings, then, similar to the happiness we receive from drinking a refreshing drink after having been thirsty, we think, in dependence on this very sentient being, I will attain enlightenment, and look at them with a clear mind in a loving manner. So if this is how we're framing all of our contacts with other beings, then how wonderful. We're seeing them all as very, very precious. This is very similar to that first verse of the 8 verses. We've been touching on some of the 8 verses here and there. The very first one is, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. I shall hold them most dear at all times. It's the attitude we want to bring into our lives. See every being as incredibly precious, incredibly valuable, because our own enlightenment depends upon them. You cannot get enlightened by excluding, a number of beings, saying, well, I'm going to get enlightened for all these beings because they're great, they're wonderful, they're nice, and forget all of those beings. You won't get enlightened with that mind. You need to have a mind that embraces all beings. So in that way, they are all very precious to you. You will get the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings that will also then be used for all sentient beings. The third outline within this, to be skillful in practicing virtue, is relating oneself and being skillful in the actions of the 3 doors, is relating oneself only to virtuous actions. So this has 3 outlines within it. Again, it's only 3 verses, so we have 1 verse per outline. The very first outline within this of relating oneself only to virtuous actions is practicing generosity to the special field of offering. So just kind of interesting. Again, in Master Shantideva's text, he never works with that first perfection of generosity. We're right now going through the second perfection of engaging in the perfection of ethics, morality. And included within it, again, is this idea of practicing virtue. Well, generosity itself is an amazing virtue, making offerings, to do things that we can to be materially generous, generous with the Dharma, to give protection from danger and so on. But here we're looking particularly at the idea that there are these special fields that if we engage in generosity towards, they're much more meritorious for us. So they could create a lot of merit with regard to our actions. Not that we should exclude virtue as actions towards others, but kind of keeping this in mind, that these are very powerful fields for us. So verse 81 says, always being motivated by affection or being motivated by the antidotes, in the field of excellent qualities, benefit, and suffering, great virtues will come about. So we have these three fields that are identified in the third line. The field of excellent qualities are, the three jewels. The gurus would be included in that. They are said to be the top of the heap in terms of, because of the qualities that they possess, they become very powerful objects for us to make offerings towards, to engage in following the advice of, and so on. Then the second one, the field of benefit, this includes one's parents and others who have been major benefactors to oneself. Your parents benefited you by giving you this precious human life, this body that you have, and due to that kindness, they are a great field of benefit for us. The last one, field of suffering, are while we could say all sentient beings who are in samsara are suffering, this is specifically those who are suffering in the grosser way. The destitute, the sick, the disenfranchised, and so forth. This is how they're described in Gyaltsabje's commentary. Sometimes there it's called the field of misery, those beings who are in a much more destitute state that require greater resources and so on. It's a very powerful object for us to practice towards. So the first two ideas, the first two lines, that we're motivated by affection, we're motivated by a clear wish to benefit others, and we're continually motivated in that way. We have that always being mentioned. Have that as our main state of mind that we're engaging in towards others. Or being motivated by the antidotes, by having the antidotes to the deluded states of mind, or being free of the antidotes to our more virtuous state of mind. There's different ways that this is phrased in different texts. But that being the course of our action, in those three fields, we want to engage in as much virtue as possible, because great virtues come about when we are dedicated to those three fields. So let me read what's in Gyaltsabje's commentary that elucidates this a little bit. It says, making offerings on a continual basis, because he's using making offerings here because it is a practice of generosity that is being highlighted, but we can say certainly all of our actions towards other beings who are in these three fields are very powerful. And they're powerful in a negative way too. This is something to keep in mind. We shouldn't be doing actions that upset our birth parents, that upset our gurus or those who are holy beings in this world. And certainly we should not be, doing things that cause more suffering to those who are destitute and in difficult situations. But the idea here is we're mostly focusing on our virtuous activities in this section. So if we do that continually, with constancy, motivated by a clear wish, what is sometimes called a strong adherence, this strong dedication to the welfare of others, having, as it was said in our translation, affection for others, caring about others, concern for others. And he said that is a strong aspiration and an antidote against the opposing side, such as non-attachment. So we have an antidote present that will keep us from going to attachment or any problematic states of mind that will get in the way of our practice of virtue. In this case, attachment to our goods, miserliness, holding on to things tightly. So we've generated the antidote to those so that we can give freely. Then to the making offerings to the three fields of qualities, benefit, and misery or suffering generates great virtue. This, engaging in that type of generosity is very powerful. And again, he identified the field of qualities as the triple gem and so forth, the field of benefit as one's parents and so forth, and then the field of misery or suffering as the destitute, sick, disenfranchised, and so forth. And another commentary that I had said that essentially these are three qualities that we're trying to develop with regard to those three fields. The first one is devotion. Our gurus or the three jewels are objects of devotion for us. We have great devotion and dedication to following their advice, to being in line with what they are trying to achieve for us. The second one, in regard to one's parents, the field of benefit, has to do with gratitude, which is kind of a nice way of framing this, is to understand that why we have them as a field of benefit for us is because we're grateful for what they've done for us. Those who have helped us in this life to a larger extent, as well as certainly our own parents that gave birth to this body that we have. And then the third one, the field of misery or suffering, is all about generating the virtuous quality of compassion. So we have devotion, gratitude, and compassion, being generated by practicing, offering, and being, generous and kind to those three fields. Pema Chodron talks about a 3-bite practice that she does when she sits down to eat food, for example. And of course, in Buddhism, we always want to offer the first part of our food to the 3 jewels. So that's your first bite, right? That's already part of your refuge commitment, to make sure that you're thinking of the 3 jewels, especially your own gurus, and developing a strong wish to offer to them, to have them be the recipients of that. And then the second one, the second bite that she takes, she thinks about her parents and others who have been benefactors to her, and kind of offers to them, has that wish of them receiving what they need through her partaking of food. And the third bite is thinking about all those who are suffering, who don't have food or don't have medicine or don't have what they need in their lives right now, and kind of making that a transformation of that offering to them. It's kind of a nice way to do that. And again, I imagine most of you already have the practice of offering your first bite of food or your first drink of tea or water or coffee or whatever to the 3 jewels. It just means you do that 2 more times with regard to these other 2 fields. And very powerful merit can be generated, because those beings who are really in very difficult situations are very powerful objects for us to practice with. And certainly, again, our parents and others who've tended to us with great kindness are also very powerful. But certainly, the most powerful are the field of qualities, those beings who are dedicated to our welfare and the welfare of all beings. And by virtue of that, they become, huge objects for us, because the welfare of all beings is wrapped up in them. They have a mind that is dedicated to that. So the last bit of the commentary from Gyaltsab Je says, making offerings to these objects in this manner, again, with constancy and this strong aspiration, motivation, creates great virtue, and one should strive in it. Now, it's kind of interesting in the other commentary by Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen that I've been referring to here and there, because I used that earlier. There's a quote from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, which I think we've had quotes from before. The 5 types of great virtues and non-virtues are actions that arise constantly, with a strong adherence, without antidote, and from the basis of benefit or the basis of foremost qualities. Strive in the practice of virtue. So in this verse from that text, that short text, Nagarjuna is identifying 5 types of great virtues or non-virtues. As I said, our negative actions also can become strong when we have one of these involved. So let me read what's from a commentary in regard to this. I'll keep this on the screen so you can keep track of the ones that I'm talking about. The first one, actions that arise constantly. This commentary is by Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche, and this is a book from Snow Lion called Nagarjuna's Letter to a Friend. He says there are 5 great kinds of positive or negative actions. 1, actions that are performed constantly, with a constant underlying attitude, and that are special in terms of their application. So this is this first one, that are constantly done, kind of with this, having that constancy of our attitude, our desire to apply ourselves to engaging in that virtue. 2, those that are done with great determination, or what's called here a strong adherence, as the attitude of the moment, and that are special in terms of their intention. So those that are done with this strong affection for beings, essentially with bodhicitta motivation is what we're talking about, of course, having the greatest power in terms of the positive actions. They say one of the most negative minds that one would have, that would be the strong adherence in the opposite way, is a mind of anger. But anyway, so the idea here is for the virtuous, there's this arising constantly, having this strong adherence, a great aspiration. Third, those that have nothing to counter them. Here, as I said, it's without antidote. In the previous verse, we saw that it's being motivated by the antidotes. There, the idea was that we had the antidote to the opposing states of mind, the miserliness that would keep us from being generous, for example. Here the idea is that they are free from the antidote. The idea is that those that have nothing to counter them, that is an opposing action that can destroy them. So in that sense, we would say it's without the counterforce of miserliness. You could be with the counterforce of being free of miserliness, or you could be not having the counterforce of miserliness. I mean, they say the same thing, but it's just different ways of phrasing it. So he says those that have nothing to counter them, that is, an opposing action that can destroy them, and are special in terms of counteragent. And then the last two that are mentioned here, benefit, basis of benefit, and basis of foremost qualities. He says, and beneficial or harmful acts that are special in terms of their field. This being of two kinds, so they narrow it down to two here. Beneficial fields, such as parents and teachers, and in particular, bears, monkeys, and so forth that have helped one, as in the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. And the next one, the final of these, fields who have the most essential qualities. So again, the basis of foremost qualities is what was in our translation on the screen. That is the three jewels and those who have risen out of the samadhi of cessation, so those who have attained that level of realization. So again, the idea behind sharing this verse was just to show that there's connections to other great texts coming from the Mahayana tradition, highlighting these three points that were discussed in our verse as well, kind of always constantly being motivated by affection. That's secondly being that strong adherence. Thirdly, being motivated by the antidotes, having the antidotes to the counter states of mind, miserliness and so forth, that would get in the way of making one's offerings. And then there they identified three fields by just including this idea of the fields of suffering, that those beings who are in a particularly bad way. Okay, so then on to the second outline, creating virtue out of one's own power, verse 82. Again, this is the second of the third outlines in this idea of relating oneself only to virtuous actions, trying to become as familiar with virtuous actions as possible and creating, the strongest merit from that. Now, in our translation, the one that you have that is the FPMT translation, they put a footnote on it because it says, I should always perform actions endowed with skill and joy, but joy seems to be ascribing error and it should be faith. So then it would say, I should always perform actions endowed with skill and faith. In all actions, I should not depend upon anyone else. That sounds kind of weird to say that you shouldn't depend upon anyone else. You need others to engage in actions. That's not quite the meaning of this. The idea is that we don't want to be putting all that on others to perform actions for us. We should be engaged in those actions ourselves and not have, people who we designate as, oh, you go do this for me, go do that for me. We should be the ones doing those actual actions. And we should do that endowed with skill and with faith in the Dharma and so on. So let's take a look at what Gyaltsep Je says in regard to this, page 39. He says, having become proficient in what has to be adopted and what has to be abandoned, and in what one should engage in and what one should not, as well as having generated faith in virtue, I shall now continuously practice virtue. So the idea of skill that was mentioned in that verse means one has to have the skill that understands the differences between these two, what I have to engage in and adopt and what I should be discarding and abandoning. And once I know that and I have great faith, generated faith in virtue that by our own understanding of karma, by our own reliance upon the teachings of the Buddha, we know that we will accumulate the positive energy that will help us on our path by engaging in these actions. Then, we will continuously practice virtue. We will do that from our own power, from, not relying upon others to do it. We don't have to rope everyone else. It's good to encourage others in practicing virtue, but don't make them the people who are practicing virtue for you. You need to engage in your own virtue. Another reading of this last line, though, where it says, I won't depend upon others, is that we shouldn't also be relying upon others to tell us what to do, especially our gurus. It is good to go to your gurus for some advice, absolutely. But, we shouldn't be always asking them, well, what should I do and what should I do? Should I do something positive? We should be, the teachings they've given us have informed us of what is the proper thing to adopt and what is the thing we should abandon. Well, then we should be self-motivated. We shouldn't need always our guru leaning over our shoulder and saying, it would be really good if you did this. It'd be great if you did some purification tonight. It'd be good if you did your prostrations in the morning or whatever. We should be doing what we can on our own, from our own power, because we've heard the teachings, we've taken the advice, and we don't need to depend upon them. We should have our our own manner of being dedicated to the practice of virtue. So let's go back to the slides and take a look at what is next in terms of this third section, this final section of this outline. Increasing one's virtue ever more and thinking about the purpose. The perfections such as generosity are progressively more exalted, but for a little, I should not forsake something greater. Principally, I should consider the welfare of others. So this is kind of giving us this final, advice in this section. We're in the final, tail end of this section on the second type of morality, of ethics, that how we're going to increase our virtue and continue to be dedicated to the purpose is by making sure that our actions are the most powerful, by always having the welfare of others be our guide. That if the actions that we're going to engage in are dedicated to the welfare of others, then that is how we can generally follow the advice, and not forsake something greater that will create a greater benefit to others for something that is lesser, that won't create as much benefit for others. Now, I'll go through the commentary that's on this, and you might have a question. At least a question can come up, and it even came up in another commentary that I was reading that is from the Nyingma tradition. I haven't cited much from that so far because it's generally been in agreement, but it does have a nice commentary on this. Gyaltsab Je's commentary on page 40 says, engage in a skillful and progressive way into the six perfections, from generosity to wisdom, and increase them. And we've seen this before, right? That they are intended to be a gradation of practices, and that we need to practice the lower ones, the first ones, generosity, ethics, patience, and so on, before we can practice the later ones fully. But once more, we practice them all. We do the best that we can with all of them, but recognizing that they will require some fruition at the lower levels before we can really build a stable foundation, for what comes after them. So it says, do not give up the practices of generosity, morality, and so forth that are smaller from the point of view of purpose and virtue to the generosity and so forth that are bigger. Strive in the bigger. So this is the idea behind it, is that it wasn't necessarily saying that one, has to, because we did see a verse earlier, I think it was verse 44, where we were being admonished to, if we're dedicated to practicing generosity, then we shouldn't necessarily worry about the morality of that. Remember how we used the example that His Holiness had about the person who's in the woods and the deer goes bounding by, and then the hunter comes after the deer and asks you, where is this, did you see this deer? I'm hunting a deer. And at that time, because you're practicing the generosity of protection, giving protection to that being, you are allowed to engage in a fault in your morality by lying to that person, because the greater goal of practicing your generosity has to be upheld at that time, because that's the main practice you're engaging in. And so to have some weakening of your morality to lie to that person is allowed in that situation. It's perfectly fine in that situation. But here we're talking about there's a couple of different ideas, but what was expressed by Gyaltsab Je is that we're talking about, if I have a choice between two types of generosity, the generosity that will only create a minimal amount of merit because it's only, dedicated to one or two beings or what have you, versus a generosity that is much greater in terms of the welfare that it could bring to others, well, then it's a clear decision. We're always going to be dedicated to that which brings about the greater benefit. We want more bang for our buck, in a sense. If we're going to engage in virtue, make sure we get the most out of our virtue. Then he goes on, this shows implicitly that if we cannot practice both together and have to choose, then we should abandon the smaller for the bigger. We should definitely always try to achieve the greatest possible result. And the question is raised in our text, in our commentary, how does one posit small and big? For example, if in this life, out of the purpose of self and the purpose of other, oneself receives harm when practicing for other, then one should make the purpose of other the main practice. So we should always have that kind of underlying motivation that we're concerned about the welfare of others, not so much our own welfare. And if we have to sacrifice our own welfare in order to engage in the welfare of others or to create greater benefit for others, we happily do that. So this is the idea of greater or smaller in this context. Though the question is raised, in reference to that verse 44. In fact, I think in the slides I may have, I don't know if I put verse 44 there or not. Let me check and see if I did that. If I did, then I'm thinking ahead, but I don't know that I did. No, I didn't. Okay, let's go ahead and stop the share then. Verse 44, let me see if I can read it from this other translation. It essentially was saying, again, that we could sacrifice our practice of morality for generosity. It said, in this way, all is accomplished well, otherwise neither will be accomplished. The secondary afflictions, which are non-introspection, will not increase in this way. So the idea behind it is that if we're engaging in the stages of the path in a sequential manner, and we start at generosity and then we'd be going on to morality and so on, that if our main practice is generosity, it's okay to let the morality go to achieve the goal of being generous. In that case, that example I gave you, to give protection. This is an interesting little commentary. I don't know, it was published as both a hardbound book with the commentary, and then the other one has just the verses in it. But the verses are repeated in here. This is page 175, and it's a commentary on Shantideva's text written by Sazang Mati Panchen, known as an extremely clear illumination of the meaning of the text. He says, one may wonder, isn't this contradictory to the earlier statement that morality may be held in a neutral state at the time of giving? The answer is that one should carefully analyze the size of the virtue, whether large or small, superior or inferior, and whether it will primarily benefit other beings or not. It is said that to accomplish a vast act of giving, morality may be held in a neutral state. It is also said that one should arise from absorption and meditation to give a gift of Dharma to the masses. These and other statements demonstrate that one should consider which is superior and which is of greater benefit. So the idea, again, it doesn't really contradict what we saw earlier in regard to that verse, because we were talking about a different level of training, perhaps. But this should be, again, a motivation that we should try to bring to what we do, is always looking at trying to engage in the greater virtue. Yeah. So, I mean, again, I'll just make up an example that say that Lama Zopa Rinpoche is in town, and you're going to go to hear his teachings, but then a friend calls and says that they need some help with some problem that they're having. Well, to go to hear your guru teach, to engage in that level of practice and what have you, is far superior than helping that person at that time. I mean, if you can do both, that's great. But we are sometimes caused to, we have to decide what we're going to do with our time. Always what will bring about the greatest benefit. If there's that, I remember when I saw one of the Star Trek movies, I think it's actually at the end of I don't know if it's the Wrath of Khan or one of those, but where Spock is giving up his life, and he says the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many or the few or whatever. And the idea being that if you've got more people involved, if you have a bigger basis for your virtuous action, then that outweighs the needs of one. Now again, ideally we want to help all beings. Ideally we want to be able to do what we can to alleviate the suffering and meet the needs of everyone in our lives. But there will be times where we do have to decide. So anyway, that's enough about that perhaps, but that's the sort of gist of that one. So that concludes this chapter where we've been looking at this second type of morality. How do we engage in gathering virtue? And again, we didn't really get kind of some of the main advice that's often talked about of practicing the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, protecting others' lives, protecting their goods, and so on, all of that. We kind of got a framework for understanding that we do need to have various qualities to practice virtue. We do need to let go of our attachment to the body, and then make sure that our body, speech, and mind in terms of our actions are always as clear as they can be to others. So anyway, this is the idea behind this this chapter, or this section of the chapter, where we're looking at the second of these. Let's go back to our slides, and we're going to move into the third, the training and the morality that accomplishes the welfare of sentient beings. Now, as I said previously, the first two we could say anybody pretty much needs to engage in, and can engage in without too much difficulty, or restraining oneself from engaging in misbehavior, not killing others, and so on. Training in the morality of accumulating virtuous dharmas. This is needed by, pretty much anyone in any spiritual path. But this is, a really key one that the Bodhisattva also wants to be dedicated to, is accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings. Now again, in the bigger overarching way, we are helping to do that by having bodhicitta motivation, and bodhisattvas who have that motivation are always engaging in actions that are motivated by that. So in that way, the boundary between each of these three also starts to get a little hazy, because they could all be pertaining to any one particular action. Because refraining from morality is virtuous, engaging in actual virtuous dharmas is virtuous, accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings is virtuous. We're all about training in how do we move in the more positive direction. But here we're specifically talking about how do we be dedicated to helping other sentient beings. So there's a few things that are in the handout that I had everyone receive as part of participating in this course. Again, I don't have the actual handout in front of me, so I couldn't tell you what page this is on, but it's towards the latter part of it. The ethics of enacting the welfare of sentient beings is what it was called there. And I've got some comments from Abbot Dakpa Gyaltsen's commentary. He says, the ethics of enacting the welfare of sentient beings refers to correctly accomplishing, without misdeeds, the welfare of sentient beings in this and future lives by means of our ethics. Any help we give, while motivated by the altruistic intention and holding the Bodhisattva vow, constitutes this third type of ethics. There are 11 major ways of assisting others, though. These are highlighted, and I'll get to a slide on that shortly. First, a little bit from Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise, the Lamrim Chenmo. There he says, the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings means that you focus on the welfare of 11 sorts of living beings and then accomplish their aims in this and future lives in a suitable manner and without wrongdoing. Again, I'm going to give you the list, and it's on your sheet that you have, your handout. I'm not going to go into commentary on all of these, but essentially these include those who need help, who are requesting assistance from us, those who are confused as to the proper method, those who have given us help, those who are afflicted by fear, those who are afflicted by sorrow and grief and so on, those poor in goods, the destitute, those who want a dwelling, can be travelers who need a place to stay, what have you, those who want mental harmony, those who proceed correctly, those who proceed wrongly. So we want to help those who are on the right path, but also especially help those who are on the wrong path. And those who need to be disciplined by supernormal powers. Of course, this is the prerequisite for this, is that we have such supernormal powers. It is said that you can have various powers accumulated by virtue of your concentration. When you attain certain levels of concentration, you have the basis by which you can do magical emanations and various things that would be of benefit to others. So if there's somebody who needs disciplining by that and we possess those powers, then we would obviously be dedicated to helping them in that way. So if we look at this list, it's essentially beings who are in a state in their life right now where they require some intervention, somebody to help them get on the right path, help them to understand things better, help them to have food, help them to have a place to stay, whatever the case might be. So this is making it very evident the Bodhisattva isn't just sitting up in a cave somewhere, meditating. The Bodhisattva needs to be involved in the world. And when these sorts of situations arise, the Bodhisattva wants to be responsive. So we're not going to get like a whole discourse from Master Shantideva on those 11 and what have you. Instead, he's going to point out some various factors that contribute to our ability to help others most effectively, how we can benefit others through how we engage in behavior towards them and so on. So the first outline is diligence for the welfare of others, and this has 5 outlines within it. Whoops, I didn't put the first outline in there, did I? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I don't know why I have, okay, yeah, I don't think it has 5 outlines. If it's only got 1 verse, it can't have 5 outlines. That's got to be an error in my slide. Sorry about that. Diligence for the welfare of others. When these are well understood, meaning everything we've looked at, I should always strive for the welfare of others. The far-seeing, compassionate ones have allowed those that were forbidden. So once more, we have this kind of idea that there are some actions that we might normally be forbidden from engaging in, but as bodhisattvas with good motivation, we can actually engage in those if our goal is the welfare of others. Having understood that this is kind of how we're going to go about living our lives, then we will engage in the welfare of others, even if there are some obstacles to doing that. Whoops, sorry. Let me stop the share and read a little bit from the commentary. So the question is given saying, Bodhisattvas strive to always abide in working for others on the basis of having understood what needs to be practiced and what needs to be abandoned. Remember, we just saw that previously, having that skill that understands this is what I need to do and adopt, and this is what I need to discard and stop doing. So then we get dedicated to the welfare of others. This is leading us into this third type of ethics. The question is raised, though, but since they need to engage in a variety of actions to achieve the welfare of others, do they not receive faults? Aren't there times when they might have to engage in some harm to someone else in order to give benefit to the beings that are the object of their actions at that time? The answer is the compassionate Buddhas also see directly the phenomena hidden very far in the future. Out of this knowledge, they permit, and again, it's not that they're the arbiters of this, they are rather just saying that it is understandable and okay for us to engage in the 7 non-virtues of body, speech, body and speech, again, the 3 of body and the 4 of speech that we saw previously, which they do prohibit for hearers and self-liberators, solitary realizers, who work primarily for their own purpose. Those are the 2 types of Hinayana practitioners. So for somebody who's on the Hinayana path that's leading to their own individual liberation, those are strongly prohibited. There aren't any sort of exceptions to that. One has to abide by that morality very purely. But for those on the Mahayana path, the path that leads to enlightenment, because their goal is the welfare of all sentient beings, they can have transgressions of particularly those 7 acts, the 3 of body and the 4 of speech, in specific situations. Not just any time, they don't have this carte blanche to be able to do whatever they want. So it says, for bodhisattvas, when necessary, these can be, where was I reading? Maybe I'll let go to that sentence, go on to the next one. As a result, bodhisattvas do not only not incur a fault, but for them it becomes a great accumulation of virtue when they engage in these actions. So generally the bodhisattva's behavior is to refrain from those. Again, that was the first type of the 3 moralities, to not engage in misbehavior, to avoid non-virtue. But there are situations where you will not only be allowed to engage in non-virtue, to hold a higher ideal, but you will also accumulate great merit by virtue of doing that. So you may wonder, well, what are those situations? And I say these, but give the caution that it's not something that most of us will have the ability to do, because we're not at a stage in our own spiritual development where we have the understanding that we know that we're doing that. We might think that we're doing that, but if we only think we're doing that, then we may not be doing that. So the examples given from the Sutra being proficient in the Great Secret, it is taught that because the captain killed the evildoer, his time in psychic existence was reduced by many eons. It is also like that, and it was taught to the Brahmin's son, Karme Jungwa. I don't know much about the second story, but the first one is the one that most of you have heard before, when the Buddha, as a bodhisattva in a previous life, was the captain of a ship, and he saw that one of the people on board the ship was going to kill the other 499 passengers. And moreover, I've heard, in looking into this story a little more deeply, that all those 499 were also bodhisattvas. They were also on the learning path. And so through the clairvoyance that this ship captain had, he was able to see that this one individual was going to take the life of 499 people, and by virtue of that was going to experience unbelievable suffering, because they were bodhisattvas. They were people who were dedicated to the welfare of others. Again, those are powerful objects for us. We just saw that previously. They're a field of qualities. So through his omniscience, or his clairvoyance, and knowing that this was going on, he decided to take the life of that being, in order to interrupt that, so that that being wouldn't accumulate all that negative karma. And of course also so that these bodhisattvas weren't killed. But he had like a compassion that embraced all of it. And through his wisdom of knowing this was the right thing to do, it actually became a virtuous action because his compassion was so strong. Well, again, for most of us, we don't have that clairvoyance that knows what's going on, that can see the effects of these actions, that can, make a decision on the basis of that. So this isn't, again, a permission for us to engage in anything we want, any of the 7 non-virtues of body and speech, in order to do whatever it is that we think is the right thing to do in the world. I think, again, we have to be pretty highly developed to know that. But nonetheless, there are situations where that may be the case. For bodhisattvas on the path, they might need to engage in something that would look like it's non-virtuous, but it actually becomes virtuous because their motivation is compassionate, is embracing all the beings involved. So let's go forward then and go back to the slides and continue this exploration of this. So again, we can gather uh, virtue and what have you. Let me go back to that outline, sorry. We can have diligence for the welfare of others, be dedicated to the welfare of others, and not even run into errors when we do see situations where we might have to engage in non-virtue for the sake of a larger purpose. Then in the second outline, the action of gathering others without incurring a fault. This one has two outlines. First, this whole idea of gathering others, I thought it might be useful to just briefly introduce this. I realize it's taking up some of our precious teaching time, but there are two ways that bodhisattvas practice. This is also on your handout, by the way, that bodhisattvas practice in order to benefit others. The first is what we're talking about in this text primarily, which is to help others indirectly by gathering the two sets of accumulations, the accumulation of merit, the accumulation of wisdom, that will lead to the four bodies of a Buddha. The four bodies of the Buddha are the two form bodies and the two truth bodies, the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya, that are the final results of our practice of the path. The means by which bodhisattvas accomplish this has already been discussed under the practices of the six perfections. So again, everything we're learning in this text is how to indirectly help others, to be influential on other sentient beings, to benefit others by developing these qualities ourselves. The second way that bodhisattvas are able to help other living beings is to help them directly by leading them into the practice of the Dharma. The way to do that is to practice the four means of ripening the minds of others, sometimes called the four collections of a bodhisattva's action, sometimes called the four means of gathering disciples, which is the title I gave to this, because this section that we're in is kind of talking about that. What do we need to do that most skillfully, to be dedicated to the welfare of others by gathering disciples? Again, not proselytizing. That's not what we mean here. We just mean that we're in a good position to benefit others because of our motivation, and we want to be dedicated to connecting with them, to helping them. So the four means are a graded set of actions for gathering disciples and for leading them through the stages of the path. It could therefore be said that the six perfections serve mainly one's own benefit by ripening our own mind, and the four means serve mainly the benefit of others. This is how we accomplish kind of the welfare of both ourselves and others. The four means are giving, speaking pleasantly, applying the meaning, and acting in accord. And you'll find these in the Lam Rim towards the end of the Mahayana section, the presentation of the six perfections, often before we get into the last two perfections in more detail. But let's go through those very briefly. The first one is giving, is as discussed in the perfection of generosity, although in this context, the primary emphasis is on the giving of material things. How do we bring people into our circle of disciples, bring them into, having some influence on them? Frequently, it's by giving them something material, something that will help them. Secondly, we have to speak pleasantly, which we already saw presented earlier in this evening, right? And this is the means of skillfully teaching the Dharma to disciples, to doing what we can to help them to be amenable to hearing the Dharma through speaking it pleasantly to them, conveying the meaning to them, and so on. Applying the meaning is the means of helping them to put into practice the teachings that you have given. So we can, give them those teachings, but then we have to help them to apply them in their lives, to do what they can to make the teachings come alive for them. Then finally, the fourth one, acting in accord. This is, of course, practicing what you preach. It's the means to set a good example by doing that, by making sure that our actions are in accord with the teachings that we are giving to others. So if we're, a hypocrite and saying one thing but acting in a totally contrary way, well then the teachings aren't going to resonate with others, and they're going to lose their faith in us, and we won't have good results from that. So again, within this gathering others without incurring a fault, the first one is gathering with the mundane, the first of the two outlines. There's three outlines within that. The difference between offering food and not offering food. Verse 85, I should divide my food amongst those who have fallen into error, those without protection, and those abiding in modes of conduct, and eat merely what is suitable for myself. Except for the 3 robes, I may give away all. So we're kind of talking here about this first type of giving, this first of the 4 means of gathering disciples to kind of in mundane ways. We want to have this mind that is willing to share what we have with others. And it starts off with the first 3 lines of talking about food. So Gyaltsep Je says, whilst using food, share first with those fallen into the wrong direction, that is, animals and hungry ghosts. So those who've fallen into error, who are in these lower states, if we can actually physically share with animals, it's a wonderful thing to do. But hungry ghosts, well, there are practices that some people do of sharing like a torma from their food that they can set out for these spirits to partake of. But essentially, you can even do that through visualization, thinking that, again, the food that you're eating is being offered to them. The next one is with the protectorless, those who are without protection, who are the sick and so on that need some assistance. The third is those abiding in modes of conduct, which are those that practice pure action and abide in austerities, if they are there as well. So if we have any of these sources that we can give to, our food, clothing, money, whatever the case might be, food's pointed to here, but it can be anything, then we should be doing that, and only partake of, eat merely what is suitable for myself. As it is said in Gyaltsep Je's page 42, he says, as it is said, it is appropriate for oneself to measure everything. Oneself should eat just enough according to the value paid without incurring faults in relation to food, and with the motivation for eating that is explained in the letter to a friend. So I did put in the verse from Letter to a Friend that talks about that motivation. It says, take food as medicine in the right amount, without attachment, without hatefulness. Don't eat for vanity, for pride or ego's sake. Eat only for your body's sustenance. Eat so that we can, engage in virtue, so we can use this body well. So then looking back at this verse, the last part of it, having talked about food or other things that we have that are helping us in our own comfort, having the life that we lead, we want to be as generous as we can. Except for the 3 robes. Of course, this is advice for a monk or a nun. They are supposed to maintain possession of their 3 robes. Everything else can be given away. Of course, for lay people like ourselves, well, then we have to be a little bit mindful about, how are we engaging in acts of generosity. Maybe we're not ready to give everything away. Well, we keep more than 3 robes, certainly most of us, but at least we should do what we can to move in that direction. Here, Master Gyaltsep Je says, once more on page 42, an ordained bodhisattva should offer everything apart from the 3 robes, or namjar, dago, and tongo. If one has more of the 3 robes, then one should also offer these. If you have 2 sets or 3 sets of robes, then you should be offering those. But if one has only 1 set, then one should not offer one's robes. It becomes an obstacle to the practice of pure action, of course, because you want to, still maintain your appearance of a monk or a nun and so on. But anyway, this is, again, a verse that I think is just encouraging us to move in the direction of generosity. As I said, there's no dedicated chapter to generosity. It is talked about a little bit in the dedication verses where we dedicate merits for all beings. It's a giving away of that meritorious energy. But nonetheless, this is a very virtuous action that is about benefiting others. Others need things. There are people with many needs in the world right now. And do what we can to give to them. Give to your local food banks and, if you can, to other agencies that are helping people out at this time. The second of these outlines, we'll do just a bit more, and then we'll come back and see if there are any questions, because I do want to kind of keep it moving forward. The second outline is do not harm the body for small actions. Don't do things that injure the body for just, small reward. This body that is practicing the sublime Dharma should not be harmed for only slight benefit. If I behave in this way, the wishes of all beings will be quickly fulfilled. So Gyaltsep Je says, one's body, which is the basis for practice of the holy Dharma that accomplishes extensive benefit for self and others, if it is guarded well, should not be harmed for a small benefit of others. Rather, it should be guarded like a wound. In other words, take care of this body and don't let it be harmed for some small benefit, but make sure that you're still dedicating it for the welfare of others. If one does this, Gyaltsab says, then by way of completing the 3 higher trainings, the training in morality, concentration, and wisdom, on the basis of this precious human rebirth, the wish to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings will be quickly completed. If we take care of this body, because it is a precious vessel, remember we saw that last week, it's a boat. It gets us from this shore to the other shore. Well, we need to patch the boat. We need to make sure the boat is well taken care of because it is the vehicle, the vessel through which we are able to accomplish that. So this is the meaning of this verse, that we will have the opportunity to achieve great things if we take care of this body. And then there is a quote in our text from Gyaltsab that I like the translation a little bit better for that Ziggy did in the other commentary. Although the body is seen like a foe, I mean, there are times, again, and we saw that earlier, right, the whole beginning section of looking at the attachment to the body that was in that second type of morality, that we needed to lessen our attachment to the body. This way the body is seen like a foe because it can get in the way. It's the attachment, the desire that arises within the body and so on. Nevertheless, it should be protected. By long sustaining a disciplined body, great merit will be created. So we should take care of this body because it is the means by which we will be able to accomplish great positive results. And then the third outline, explaining the time and necessity for offering the body. Of course, this is a very advanced practice to be able to offer one's body. Only high-level bodhisattvas can actually do this without any regret. Those whose attitude of compassion is impure should not give their body away. No matter what, both in this and future lives, they should give it as causes for fulfilling the great purpose. So again, Gyaltsab says that bodhisattvas offer from the beginning everything, including their body, to sentient beings from the depth of their mind. And many of you probably recite verses as part of your daily practice that say, and I give my body, wealth, and virtues to all beings of the 3 times. Well, you're not physically doing that yet. You're not being called upon like the bodhisattva that is in the continuum of Buddha Shakyamuni, who actually gave his body to a tigress who was starving so she could feed her 5 cubs and so on. Many of you know that story as well from the sutras. So it says, however, they should not give away their actual body, with an action motivated by the thought of compassion, that despite cherishing others more than oneself, does so in an impure way. If we don't have that highly developed compassion that is delighting at giving our body to another being, well, then we're not there yet. We shouldn't practice that level of generosity, that virtuous action of benefiting others. This generates despondency and regret after the austerity where one's flesh was requested. We will actually regret having done that, which isn't a positive thing. Again, regret is one of these mental factors that, depending on what thoughts accompany it, it can become virtuous or non-virtuous. Often we talk about regret of our negative actions, that's virtuous. But if we regret our positive actions because our compassion wasn't fully developed, well, then we've created a very grave error. This is extensively explained in the Compendium of Trainings, where the untimely offering of one's body is described as an action of Mara. It's an action of the delusions. One should offer it when one is really free from the obstacles to generosity, such as miserliness and so forth, and the offering becomes a faultless completion of great accumulation. Of course, they say once more that the bodhisattva who, is at that stage, they will actually experience joy at the thought of giving their body to others. In the Golden Light Sutra, which is where that story, I've seen it at least there, maybe in other sutras, of the Bodhisattva prince giving his body to the tigress and her cubs, there's a joy that arises, like, oh, I've been waiting for this opportunity to do this. Now it's finally here. How wonderful I get to do this. Well, again, most of us aren't there yet. So don't even think that this is something that you have to engage in practicing in actuality, but continue to have the thought that you give your body, your wealth, your virtues to others. Let's pause there and just see if there are any questions, either in the chat box or if others want to chime in by unmuting your mic, you can do that. And if there are no questions, I'm going to keep humming along because I'm wanting to make sure I get through this text in the next class. So let's go ahead and do some additional verses, and we'll at least be able to do a few before we conclude tonight. We're now in the second outline within this idea of the action of gathering others without incurring a fault. Kind of how do we, help others, make connections with them so that we can be a benefit to them. These means of gathering others through our own generosity was, again, the giving was the first one. Now we're talking about gathering with the Dharma, which is more in line with that idea of speaking pleasantly, and applying the meaning to them, those second and third of the four means of gathering disciples. The first outline within this is the physical actions of an audience that one should not teach. First, Shantideva is going to say, well, but be careful. Don't be teaching people who don't have a respect for the Dharma. The Dharma should not be explained to those who lack respect, to those who wrap cloth around their heads, although they are not ill, they kind of feign being, having an injury, to those holding umbrellas, sticks, or weapons, and to those with covered heads. Umbrellas are because they're parasols, and that were a kind of showing one's rank in society at the time in India. Sticks or weapons are obviously people who don't have a good intention in being there. Those with covered heads, this is again still in our Gompas, we try to discourage people from coming in with hats or head coverings. But mostly the idea here is don't get too caught up in the actual things that are on this page, that are in this verse, but rather that first line, to those lacking respect. Try to be a most respectful in regard to receiving the Dharma. I know we're in this mode of giving everything online, and people get a little bit lax sometimes. I'm not pointing to all of you, but I was on some teachings where people were, like kind of in bed, and almost like they're watching a movie on Netflix rather than, engaging in the Dharma. Even when Venerable Rabina taught, she would announce right at the beginning of her teaching that she did her 3 prostrations to the throne before she sat down to teach, and that if people want to do their prostrations, then you can do them. I mean, it is good to have that attitude that we're in the Gompa, even though we're all in these different homes and what have you. So again, I don't do that myself because I don't know, I just am not of that mindset myself, but it's certainly good advice to treat these online teachings as if you were walking into the Gompa at Shantideva Center or in Nam Droling down in Miami. That it's the same type of reverence and respect that you want to have for these teachings, not for me, for the teachings. When I prostrate to the throne, or Venerable Rabina or whoever prostrates to the throne, they're prostrating to the source of the teachings, where the teachings are going to be coming from. And when the students in the room prostrate, they should have that mind too, that they're prostrating to the Dharma. So anyway, I don't need to read the commentary for this one, I think, because it's pretty self-explanatory. Just try to maintain the most respectful appearance that you can in terms of receiving the Dharma, because those who are not in that state are not suitable receptacles for the Dharma. Second outline, analyzing the distinction of the motivation of a vessel. A vessel for the teachings must have particular motivation. The vast and profound should not be taught to lesser beings, meaning those who have a lesser motivation, who are only interested in their own individual liberation. The vast and profound of the Mahayana should not be taught to them. And this one is specific advice to a monk, that a monk should not be giving teachings or in the presence of a woman unaccompanied by a man, meaning, that is breaking a vow, and that's for nuns as well. Nuns should not be alone with a man in giving teachings or whatever, because those are opportunities for, while there could be indiscretions committed, there's also an appearance that's given there that is not so healthy to the Dharma. So even lay teachers, though, I mean, it's kind of interesting. In the FPMT, they are certainly encouraging lay teachers to be extremely careful about, who they are teaching to, having meetings with, and so on, and to be as open as possible about that, so that there's never even a hint of anything that is untoward in regard to the behavior of those teachers. But again, even ourselves as individuals, whether we are teaching the Dharma or not, we should be somewhat cautious around these sorts of things, that there won't be misunderstandings or false accusations or what have you. Out of respect for the dharmas of lesser and supreme beings as equal, though, I should utilize all. So even though we might not teach the Mahayana Dharma to those who have a lesser motivation, we should have respect for both, the Hinayana and the Mahayana, because the Dharma is necessary for both. You have to practice, even if you look at the Lam Rim, it's the first 2 scopes, the first 2 levels are based on the Hinayana teachings. We have to practice those to get to the 3rd scope, to practice bodhicitta and the perfections of a bodhisattva. So again, the advice being given here has to do with kind of motivations and making sure that we're clear in our own minds about having complete devotion and embracing of the full Dharma. Let's finish off this third one, and that may do us for tonight. Do not lead those with the wish for the great to the small. And regarding to those who have a Mahayana motivation, make sure that we don't say something to them or give them teachings that cause them to go down to the individual vehicle and only accomplish their own liberation. So I should not connect the Dharma of a lesser being to one who is a vessel for the vast Dharma, for the Mahayana. I should not forsake the conduct, nor deceive by means of sutras or mantras. So there's some additional stuff that comes into play in here. Gyaltsab Je says, do not lead, this is page 44, do not lead someone with Mahayana lineage that is a suitable vessel for the extensive Dharma to the hero path, to the individual vehicle path. Again, if somebody's already showing an inclination towards the Bodhisattva way, why would we want them to accomplish the lesser purpose? Again, it's not to say that we should have a denigration of that lower goal of one's own liberation, but that is a bit of a dead end. People go into it and they think that they've achieved liberation and can exit from samsara, which they have, but they still have to accomplish the Bodhisattva path. If someone is inclined towards the Mahayana, we should be encouraging them to enter the Mahayana from the beginning, and the time they will spend accomplishing the Mahayana will be much less. Sentient beings will have another Buddha to help them, because they've taken less time to accomplish that goal. Whereas if somebody goes through the Hinayana path, achieves their own liberation, checks out into the state of peace, and then has to be brought back into the Mahayana and go through the whole Mahayana, it takes much, much more time. So he says, do also not cause someone that is a vessel for the morality of restraint to give up their practice of morality through leading them with sutra or mantra, saying that they will become pure merely by reading sutras and mantras. So again, the idea is that we can't give people this idea that if you just do this, you'll be fine. You always, once more, have to practice all the various sequential things in regard to your morality, which again is the main topic here. Others who are engaging in refraining from their own misbehavior, don't tell them, oh, by reciting these sutras and doing these mantras, you'll be fine. They still have to, be very attentive to their own behavior. They have to avoid harming other sentient beings and so on. So don't mislead them. Don't confuse sentient beings by throwing things out to them that are not really the final answer to things. And yeah, it might be helpful for them to read sutras and have mantras, but don't make that, and do that instead of doing all of this other. Everyone has to engage in the basic practices of a bodhisattva to get to the result. So the final line was, do not mislead with sutra and mantra. So we've made it up to, again, this third section of looking at the morality of, whoops, what happened there? Oh, I know what happened. I hit the share screen thing. Somebody else put a shared screen on, perhaps. Yeah, that's what happened. Yes. Are you all still there? Okay, there we go. I don't know, somehow somebody got a screen share on there. I apologize for that. I'm not sure how that happened. But this, I think we'll be doing fine. We'll finish this next week. And any final questions or comments? I realize we've gone just a little bit over, but anything anyone needed to share? So I think it was pretty straightforward tonight. And I guess, from what I've seen, I've already reviewed the rest of the chapter, and what's coming up is pretty straightforward as well. So hopefully we can complete this. As I said, the plan is to have the 6th chapter. We're in discussions around that, and I think that's the direction we're moving in. It's just impossible for me to visit New York this year, obviously, with what's going on. So I was going to do chapter 6 over July 31st through August 2nd. But even to cram them all into that weekend seemed like a little too much for people. Like I can't imagine that in the middle of summer, no matter what's going on, that you're going to feel like being in front of your computer screen for an entire weekend going through chapter 6. So the idea is that we will do that over July and into August. I think it's going to start the beginning of July. Yes?
We spoke to, hi Don, it's Sheila.
Hi,
so
Sheila.
I spoke to Maria, and we've been working out the Zoom business, but everybody's on board to do that with the dates that you submitted.
Good.
So
Good.
We'll give you the final confirmation.
Yeah. So it'll be four Mondays in July, and then there's 5 Mondays in August, but we're skipping the first one. So it'll be 4 Mondays in August. And so that's the plan, and just stay tuned and you'll get more on that. Thanks, Sheila. All right, let's go ahead and do the prayers quickly before we conclude tonight. let's see, page down, we get to the dedication prayers. This first one where we dedicate all the merit to the attainment of enlightenment for ourselves and all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. And then recalling the power of this mind of bodhicitta that we've been talking about tonight as well as throughout this course. Make that strong, aspiration that this mind develop very deeply in your own heart and in the hearts of all beings. As I often say right now, especially in the hearts of our leaders of the countries, in this world that really need this kind of motivation to achieve the best results for everyone. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then the prayers for our precious teachers, again, recalling that these are very powerful objects for us, but we need to create the causes from our side to have them in our lives. So that's what we're doing in these 2 verses, prayers that we're going to recite, but include all gurus, all spiritual guides in the thoughts of having good health and long life for these 2 teachers. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally, as usual, dedicate for beings you're holding in your heart right now. There's, again, so much suffering in the world. No doubt you have individuals as well who are experiencing obstacles or illness, who are dying or who have died, as well as those, people in the world who are experiencing difficulties from COVID-19, what have you. I can, include all of them in our dedications, thinking that through the power of what we've done here tonight, may it become the cause to relieve the suffering of all these sentient beings we're bringing to mind, and also may it become the cause to lead them to all of what will bring them perfect happiness, all the causes and conditions that will allow them to achieve that state. And may all beings have these same results through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all so much. Sorry if I'm speeding up a little bit and going through this latter part, but I do want to conclude it and make sure we at least touch on all the verses, and I'll be all set to get us through the rest of it next Monday. So thank you all so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon.
You too. Thank you, Don.
Okay, thank you.